Hi, everyone. This is Mike Katsevman. Welcome to the Capstone 1, Capstone 2, and 2016 CFE webinar. The purpose of today's webinar is to discuss the Capstone 1 preparation process, explain what Capstone 2 will be all about to those of you that are attempting Capstone 2 for the first time, and to explain the most challenging parts of the 2016 CFE. I'm also going to be bringing in a lot of examples from the 2015 CFE based on some students that I've had in contact with, that I've been in contact with to provide some guidance and advice on some of the common mistakes that people make. And I've just decided to reach out before this webinar to a number of our students that have passed with us to just get a little bit of insight about what they would recommend for 2016 writers to be aware of before they begin their process. And at the end of this whole process, I've at the end of a couple of these conversations, I began noticing some really familiar and kind of similar items that were raised by a number of candidates, and I decided to put them all together into a presentation for you, for you to be able to understand really the most challenging parts of this exam. Now, before I begin, can you let me know if you're able to hear my voice and if you're able to see the presentation? Just give me a quick yes in the chat box on the right side of your screen. If you can hear me, just please type in yes into the chat box. I want to make sure that everyone's able to follow along. And I'm noticing that we're still getting more and more people joining us pretty much every minute. Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you. And so if at any point in time you experience any kind of difficulties with this webinar, or if you have any questions at all about anything that I'm saying, please make sure that you just drop down your question directly into the chat box on the right side of your screen. And if you have any questions at all, I'll periodically stop and take a couple of take a few minutes to answer your questions. Okay, so why don't we begin? This is the Capstone 1, Capstone 2, and 2016 CFE webinar. I'm your session leader for today. My name is Mike Katsevman. I'm the course director at PrepFormula. In the past, I've been a CPA marker with CPA Canada, and I marked the day 1 paper, which is now considered the day 2 of the CFE, which is the 5-hour case. Professionally for CPA Canada, I'm also a CPA mentor in the province of Ontario, so I can help answer any questions that you have with respect to PERT, the practical experience. And I'm also a marker, a prep trainer as part of PrepFormula's comprehensive program. So before I begin, I'd like to just share a little bit about PrepFormula. PrepFormula provides a supplementary personalized training program for students going through the CPA Canada Professional Education Program, and we pair students with markers on a one-to-one basis. PrepFormula is certified as a designated post-secondary educational institution by the Ministry of Employment and Social Development in Canada, and we issue T2202A tax receipts for all course fees paid. We had an 89% pass rate in 2014 for students using our program, and as of October 2015, PrepFormula is the largest and most trusted CPA prep program in Canada based on site traffic. I'm just going to pause here for a second, and I got a couple of comments from people saying that they are unable to hear me. So all I'm going to say is that if during this presentation you are having any difficulty, please refresh your page. I just happened to type that as well, just so I want to make sure that you are able to hear me. If for some reason during this entire presentation the audio cuts out, or you notice that you are unable to hear me anymore, please make sure that you just refresh this page and you will automatically come back to the same webinar and you'll be able to follow along again. So if you are unable to hear, and it's not a local issue, it's not that you've muted your own sound, please make sure that you refresh, right? There should be a refresh button right at the bottom of your page. Perfect. Okay. So welcome to the webinar. Before I begin, I'd like to just make sure that I also explain there's some legal things that I have to be careful about, and the interpretations below are my own opinion, and all rights are reserved. The opinions below are basically my own. and they're not to be relied upon. I just have to provide this type of a disclosure legally. And PrepFormula is not affiliated or related to CPA Canada, so we are a supplementary program. PrepFormula's activities have not been approved or endorsed by CPA bodies, of course. So why don't we just begin right into the webinar? There is another question here from David. He's asking whether the presentation is recorded. And all of our presentations are recorded, and a link will be provided to you automatically. So should you have any additional questions at a later point, not only is this going to be recorded, but I'll also provide my contact information in case you have any follow-up questions. So why don't we jump right in? Okay. Some of you in this room are probably already enrolled in Capstone 1, and some of you are probably going to be enrolled in Capstone 1 in May. Let me just explain, because we have different types of candidates in this room, I just want to make sure that everyone's on board. So I wanted to talk about a couple of really basic things as well with respect to what Capstone 1 is in a nutshell. And you're probably all really overwhelmed with the amount of content and the amount of homework that you get as part of Capstone 1, considering that the group projects are probably taking up a lot of your time. So I just want to give you a little bit of guidance on what you should be doing during this time, in addition to any of the Capstone 1 stuff. But in order for me to do that, I have to first explain Capstone 1, the purpose, and what you should really get out of it. Okay, so Capstone 1 is a large 30 to 50 page group assignment and presentation on a company called CHEI. And a number of you have watched my debrief of CHEI, where I annotated the entire case, and I kind of showed you what I would be doing as a professional marketer if I had to deal with that, or with a case like that. So the idea is, for those of you that don't know, you start off with a 3-day in-class workshop. Then you're assigned a group of randomly selected CPA candidates. And this group is anywhere from 3 to 5 people, and you work with these people together to solve this 30 to 50 page group assignment. In order to pass, you must do a couple of different things. So first of all, you have to submit your weekly submissions. There are a number of them. There's 3 to begin with at the end of week 2, 4, and 7. So the first one is your planning document, where you're just highlighting some of the major parts in the case that you're going to be talking about. The week 4 is a quantitative analysis, and the final is your final submission. That's your final report where you put it all together. Okay. At the end of this, you have to submit this report to your facilitator, and you're going to have to present in front of a group, a panel of currently practicing CPAs. Okay. And the CPAs will act as if they are the users in the case and may ask you questions here and there. So some of the questions might be really tricky, and some of the questions might be really easy, depending on how well they've done their homework. And what you may notice is some people might be a little bit lighter on you. Some people might take their role a little bit more seriously. Either way, you should all speak, and you should all be prepared. But high level, you'll be doing a lot of things such as preparing a report. And the entire concept of report preparation means that you have an unlimited amount of time to put this together. Now, the challenge is the final exam, which Capstone 1 is designed to prepare you for, will not have an unlimited amount of time like this group assignment. So the tricky part here is, how do you transition mentally from doing an unlimited amount of time, a task with an unlimited amount of time, or virtually unlimited, to writing the same type of quality, but in an extremely limited time frame. And that's why the most important thing which you should be doing as part of the Capstone 1 prep is taking an additional 10 hours a week, writing cases and practicing cases above and beyond, to continuously force yourself to think about that time pressure, because you will not receive that time pressure as part of Capstone 1. There are 2 key dates which you have to be aware of. One of them has already passed for those of you that are already in Capstone 1, and those are the start dates. There is another Capstone 1 attempt where they will be using the exact same case, CHEI, on May 14th, 2016. Let's jump into the Capstone 2 process, okay? Um, so Capstone 2 again begins with an in-classroom workshop where they introduce you to case writing. Unlike Capstone 1, there are no significant assignments which you have to do. There are weekly instructions for you to submit cases, but there's no one giant case as part of Capstone 2. Capstone 2 is mostly voluntary and introduces you to a style of case writing which you probably are not aware of yet. It's kind of similar to the overall experience as part of the electives. The cases that you'll do will be similar to the CPA professional education program elective style. But for the first time, the cases could be on any subject. So, not just something that's specifically related or mostly tied to one particular subject, like the electives. They could be on any topic whatsoever. Generally speaking, you'll have 7 to 8 weeks of voluntary weekly assignments. The reason why I call them voluntary is during the 2015 attempt, most of the assignments were voluntary. I'm not quite sure whether they're going to be changing this for the 2016 attempt, but you were not really provided with any instructions to formally submit anything unless you really wanted to. There were debriefs available in 2015, but you were specifically advised that it's up to you whether you want to submit them or not. From my perspective, these are not voluntary at all, and you should be submitting every single assignment. It's another opportunity, yet another chance for you to get your assignment marked, for you to debrief something, and for you to do well on this. But you'll notice that people that you are sitting next to in the workshops, if you look around, some people will not be taking these assignments seriously. And this is something which you have to be very careful about. From my perspective, like I said, they are not voluntary there. It's something which you have to do. Again, I really want to stress the importance of doing cases outside of Capstone 2. Capstone 2 will only have really 2 formal assignments as part of each week. So in every single week, you have to do 2 cases, generally one long, one short. This is simply not enough. It's not enough for you to be able to put together just 2 assignments and expect to pass the CFE. The reason for it is there are hundreds of students all across Canada who are taking more time. So this is not so much about what you necessarily want to do. You want to look for and you want to understand what the other candidates are doing. So considering that you're not working in kind of in a silo, everyone is trying to get a competitive advantage in some kind of a way. And what a lot of people end up doing is writing more and more and more cases above and beyond. And this is something that I would recommend for you to do. The Capstone 2 assignments will take you approximately 15 to 20 hours a week. This is up to you how you want to manage your time, except there are formal submission dates. But above and beyond that, you should be doing approximately 10 to 15 hours a week extra. And the last 4 weeks before the exam, we suggest you to actually take time off work and completely write the cases in your own time and to treat this as if this is your day job. There's absolutely nothing better than spending an appropriate amount of time trying to write as many cases as possible in an organized way. This is really, truly the only and best way to actually prepare for this exam. And we can provide you with a lot of practice cases and a lot of great practice materials for you to be able to do this. Again, there are 2 key dates for those of you finishing Capstone 1 and interested in writing the May 2016 CFE. The key date that you should know of is April 2nd. That's the beginning of the module. Now, this is also really conflicting for those of you that work in tax busy season. The issue here is you might have an employer that's not really happy with you taking time off, especially in the busiest month of the year. So you have to be really careful about your planning, and you want to have an open conversation with your employer to make sure that you are in fact taking something that they are aware of and you are preparing for this and treating this as if this is your day job and not kind of a side gig above and beyond your work responsibilities. Now, this is extremely important to passing because confidence is the number one reason why people fail this exam. It's not technical skills, it's confidence. People need to believe that they are ready for it. And you won't really believe by focusing all of your time working on your work deliverables and writing cases part time. Okay. For those of you that are attempting the May CFE, April 2nd is kind of your really important deadline. For those of you writing the September CFE, you should be focusing on a July 30th start. And my recommendation is to basically take the second week of August onwards completely off work, and then to be able to write cases back to back to back and treat this like a full formal day job. Okay. So again, I wanted to stress the importance of correct preparation. So assuming that you're writing cases above and beyond, you're treating this as if this is your day job. You are constantly writing cases. You are constantly debriefing cases. And I'm going to talk about what debriefing means in a second. You now achieve a kind of you now jump directly to the next stage. You now go through Capstone 1 and 2, and you jump immediately into the CFA. So the first thing that you'll notice by writing this exam, and I kind of talked with a couple of students who recently wrote this exam in 2015 to get their opinion of it, and they said an overwhelming comment that I got was the 2015 CFE was pretty challenging, and they generally felt completely overwhelmed with the amount of content that they had to do. The real reason for this, as kind of a number of them explained to me, was that this was the very first attempt that it was run, and no one really had any idea what this is going to look like. Now, those of you that are writing the May attempt have a little bit more guidance, and this is not going to be the first attempt through the process, but that doesn't make it easier. In fact, Capstone 1 and Capstone 2, this entire time of you taking control of your own schedule, you having to write cases whenever you want to, provides you with an illusion that the CFE is easy. Because during Capstone 1 and 2, you might be a little bit busy, but it doesn't really feel really stressful, right? So you don't really have any significant deliverables. You don't really have anything that's really stressing you out. I mean, as long as you're putting in the work, you'll pass. This is not the case for the CFE. If Capstone 1 and 2 is a level 1 or 2 out of 10 difficulty, the CFE is a level 10 out of 10 difficulty. Is it doable? Absolutely. But you just have to make sure that you are mentally ready for this, considering that it's 3 days in length. And let me just walk you through some of the key days. Day 1 is 4 hours in length. It focuses on being an extension of the Capstone 1 case, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail over the next couple of slides. And an example could be the same CAHEI case, but several years in the future, or the same company, for example, venturing into a new industry. So in addition to homes and the HE division, they might be attacking something completely different. So they might, if you have read this case, and if you haven't, this probably won't make any sense to you, but it might be a situation where they now all of a sudden want to build only power plants, right? So that could be kind of an example of a case which you might get. It's going to be based on the same CHEI materials, right? So the same Capstone 1 case materials, but it might be a bit of a twist. It's kind of like an upgrade to that initial case, right? So day 1 is directly connected to Capstone 1. Day 2 and 3 are not connected in any way to Capstone 1 or Capstone 2. So day 2 and 3 really are two separate days that are very difficult, that are not connected to any case that you've done before. Day 2 is the same case that I've had experience marking for CPA Canada, and this is where my professional experience lays. It's 5 hours in length. You have 5 hours to do whatever you want. My recommendation is to spend about an hour and a half reading and trying to plan your answer. Yes. So I just said out of 5 hours, you want to spend at least an hour and a half trying to plan this case. Now, this seems a little scary, right? Because I just told you to take a significant part of your time just to plan. And the reason for it is now, for those of you that have gone through CHEI, you can't possibly absorb everything from that CHEI case the very first time. It's something that requires a lot of practice. By getting to this stage, you probably would have had a number of other cases that you would have written, and this is something that we can typically provide you in our schedule. And this will be a very large case requiring you to achieve depth in one of four roles in addition to FR or MA. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. You're going to pick in the role up front, and you're going to have to speak about a specific topic. And again, the focus area will be on your chosen elective area. Day 3 is remarkably similar to the old UFI exam, specifically days 2 and 3 under the UFI. It's a combination of 3 shorter cases ranging anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes in length each. And they are 3 cases back to back to back. No one will be managing your time. So in the 4 hours that you'll be sitting there, no one's ever going to tell you how to manage your own time. It's just going to be 3 cases back to back. If you run out of time on the first case and you spend a little bit more time here and a little bit more time on the second case, well, all of a sudden you have a half an hour to do a 60-minute case, which is your last case. And this is by far the easiest way to fail the exam. So again, some of the key dates, which you probably want to put directly into your calendar now. You want to plan around them. You want to make sure you're not attending any birthday parties anywhere near these dates. You want to make sure that you are putting these dates into priority. And these are going to be May 25th, 2016 for 3 days onwards, and September 21st. Let me talk about day 1 in a little bit more detail. Okay, so day 1 focuses on these new enabling competencies. The CPA Canada competency map, which is a planning document that describes the 2016 CFE, describes what the enabling competencies are, and it's more about problem solving, decision making, ethical behavior, and communication skills. And if you notice, none of these specifically focus on, say, technical sections. Now, you still are required to perform well on your technical sections, but the idea isn't to suggest to a marker that you're answering a question or a problem in the right kind of way. The idea is to instead provide a great and comprehensive analysis explaining a particular decision and supporting that decision. So it's all about assisting your client making a really difficult choice, similar to what you're seeing in CHEI. So you're providing with advice. You're not necessarily providing them with any technical background. So most of the marks are allocated to providing this major decision and supporting it in the right kind of way. Day 1 is separately identified as a pass-fail exam, which means that you can pass day 1 and fail days 2 and 3, or fail day 1 and then pass days 2 and 3, and then we'll have to redo only a portion of the exam and not the entire exam going forward. Day 2, think of this as a hugely complicated and technical case where you get to pick a specific role. So again, I mentioned 30 to 40 page case, a little shorter than CHEI, which would be impossible in that time frame of 5 hours. And you get to pick to speak about depth. And I'm going to talk about exactly how these exams are marked in a second. But you have to talk about FR, financial reporting, and or management accounting, plus your chosen elective area in depth and then breadth in the other areas. I highly recommend for you to practice at least one comp, which is what day 2 is typically called, with your prep trainer. So if you're registered in our program already, and I know a number of you are attending this webinar, I highly recommend for you to book at least one session to read and plan a case together, or at least debrief a comp, one of these 5 hour cases, directly with someone on a one-to-one basis. Okay, it's something that I think is crucial. And day three short separate cases, similar to the elective module cases. Time is really crucial, and each area will focus on 3 to 4 different competency areas as part of each case. And the idea is kind of a balance between your technical requirements and your kind of qualitative. So an explanation of and support for evidence that you are arriving at. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this slide up for a second, and I'm going to kind of talk about and I'm going to look at specifically some of the questions. This is not the end of the webinar at all. Still have quite a bit to go, but I just want to take care of a couple of questions because I am noticing a couple of people that are asking questions. Let me just see whether I am able to answer a few of them. Antonio is asking, where can we get cases, or does PrepFormula provide us with those? Antonio, yes. So we have our own cases that we provide as part of our program, above and beyond anything that CPA Canada provides. Gerson's asking, how many complete cases do you suggest to write in 10 hours? So above and beyond, including proper debrief. And my recommendation is kind of, I'm going to say during Capstone 1, you might want to do an extra 1 or 2 cases a week. And as part of Capstone 2, you want to fill up your schedule. So you're doing pretty much a 4-hour case. Megan's asking, will someone provide the answer or feedback for the practice cases? And generally, yes. We provide feedback as part of our. And thank you, Sarakshit, for providing the response as well. Someone's asking about day 1. Day 1 is a 4-hour case, not a 5-hour case. Day 2 is 5 hours. And Hamida's asking, is day 2 exam between 15 to 20 pages long? Technically speaking, it could be anywhere up to 30 pages, depending on how many exhibits are present. There is no specific amount of pages that you can be tested on. It's all about the type of information that's provided, but not necessarily kind of a particular limit that you have to work within. Okay. Thank you for the questions so far, and please keep them coming. If you do see anything that you want me to talk about more, please feel free to ask me, and I'd be happy to stop and pause and to provide a little bit more guidance, okay? Okay, so the rules of the game. Those of you that have played your favorite board games before are probably very much aware that, for example, you cannot play Monopoly unless you know all the rules of Monopoly, and if you want to strategize, yeah, you have to know the rules, and you have to know what game you're playing. That's really the only way to succeed. This exam by far does not test your ability to pick the quote unquote right answer. It's all about a strategic response that maximizes as many marks as possible. Okay. So they're never really going to tell you this. They're never going to suggest for you to write in this kind of a way. CPA Canada does not intend to help you pass the exam. They want to train you to be a better accountant, which is a little bit different than what we offer. So let me explain the rules of the game. I'm going to take the language directly from the competency map and then translate and explain exactly what you should be doing in order to maximize the marks. Okay. So the level 1 was the aggregate competency demonstrated sufficiently? And this is a really confusing sentence to me. The very first time that I read this, I had no idea what they were talking about. And I found it to be very, very tricky. So aggregate competency demonstrated sufficient and sufficiently. So in other words, a case might have 8 different topics or 8 different numbers, 8 different assessment opportunities throughout a case. And what they're asking you here is, did you identify all 8? And did you speak about a sufficient number of them across the entire 5 hours? So in other words, of the 8 total general sections available, how many have you talked about? And did you get a chance to at least do reasonably well in each? That's really what sufficiency means. Did you attempt? Um, and the best way to fail on sufficiency is if you spend too much time in one area, which will force you to completely ignore another area. Does that make sense? That's a really easy way to fail on sufficiency. Okay, level two. I've just mentioned on day two that you are required to hit depth in FR or MA. For those of you that don't know what FR is financial reporting, aka accounting, and MA is management accounting. Did you demonstrate at least one in depth? You are automatically tested for both. Okay. The confusing part becomes you can technically pass the CFE and still not be eligible for public accounting if you pass on MA instead of FR. But now I'm really overcomplicating things. If you are going through the public accounting route, and if you have a little bit more questions about that, it's a really complicated structure that they've put in place now. If you want any more clarification at the end of this presentation, I promise I will leave my contact information. Please feel free to reach me and I'll explain it in more detail. Level three, in addition to FR or MA, did you then, for the role that you suggested on day two, let's say you picked assurance, did you talk about it in depth? Did you add a reasonable amount of depth to it? Okay, so level three is really asking you above and beyond the financial accounting or management accounting, did you talk about your chosen depth area? And these roles are picked ahead of time. So you have time to prepare and to assess which you think you will have a better shot of achieving depth in and which you find to be more comfortable with. Okay, so once you've passed level one, you move to level two. Once you pass level two, you move to level three, right? It's just like a video game. And the last level, which you need to meet, let's say you've met all three first levels, you now need to meet a level called breadth. And what they generally mean is across all 2 days, okay? And this is primarily something that applies to days 2 and 3. Across the 2 days, if you were to add up all of the various requirements and all the assessment opportunities throughout these 2 days, did you at least score a competent grade in each of the other areas? So what they're really trying to say, it's not a sufficiency question. Did you speak about enough overall requirements or assessment opportunities? They're more asking you, did you at least achieve a reasonable amount of depth, but they call it breadth. Breadth because it's a little bit of a lower level than depth. Did you at least talk about it in a sufficient way in the other 4 areas that you are not talking about? So out of the other technical competency areas, did you at least attempt to score a C in the other areas? Does that make sense? I hope that that's clear. That's really the kind of the best way that I can explain that. Assuming that you pass all 4 levels, you move down immediately and you pass. And assuming that you have your practical experience all set up, you're good to go. You are a CPA. Okay, so now I wanted to talk about a couple of case writing best practices. So this part of the webinar is something that I've modified a little bit, and I've taken a little bit of input from 2015 CFE writers, and I've tried to put together a couple of best practices, and we wanted to talk about providing kind of a level of depth. The challenge that I'm finding now is everywhere you go, whether it's on a blog online, whether it's on a forum online, everyone has their own opinions. There are so many opinions that are floating around, and people will tell you really remarkable things. And the challenge is a lot of people that provide advice today have went through one of the 3 legacy processes. They have no clue what this new process is all about. The advice provided from any legacy process to me is not relevant. Forget about it. It's gone, right? Unless you are involved in the process today, and unless you understand just how different this process is today, you're going to find this process to be very, very challenging, because a lot of the advice provided, again, are from people that have passed the legacy designations. I'm not saying that the advice is completely wrong, but I'm saying you have to make sure that you qualify the response or qualify the advice and know that the process has changed. So I wanted to present you with some information about the way that we typically recommend for people to write cases. We use a system called RODAC. This is different than the CPA way, quote unquote. This is something that we came up with and we stick behind. Okay. The first step is for you to read the case, right? Stands for the R. Try to absorb as much information. I then want you to organize your response into an outline. Okay. And we're going to talk about outlining in a second. Then I want you to divide everything into competency area topics. So as you're reading and planning, divide everything into the outline and use separate competency area topics on your outline. At the end of doing this, this is the critical point. You then have to apply a preferred format. Now, there is a big misconception out there that people say something like, do not template. Do not write the same thing that you're supposed to write for every response. And to me, the word template and the word format sound the same, but they don't mean the same thing. Templating is borrowing case facts from one case and applying them to another. That's not what I'm suggesting here at all. I am suggesting to use an appropriate format to write your response that would maximize as many marks as possible. So I'm going to also share a number of the most common preferred formats that we hear about that people have actually used in the real exam and have passed with. And last but not least, at the end of all of these, you have to conclude. So sometimes you're reading a case, you might not necessarily have an opportunity to provide your own opinion in specific areas. But what I always want you to get into the habit of is providing a formal conclusion at the end of every topic. The formal conclusion basically saves your response and provides you with an opportunity to demonstrate to a marker that you understand exactly what is happening big picture. You might be reading 5 different small pieces throughout the case somewhere, which will provide you with hints about something going wrong. And overwhelmingly, you'll notice that the company is going down south, okay, and going bankrupt slowly. But there's no requirement for you to talk about potentially a going concern risk because the client's never going to ask you for it. So maybe this is something that you have to provide, and maybe this is something that you have to talk about. So this is what I mean about a formal conclusion. Always leave a couple of minutes, say 3 to 4 minutes at the bottom of each case to make sure that you provide a comprehensive conclusion and kind of a recommendation. Assist your client, help them out, and help them to continue operating their business in the way that they intended. This is a sample outline that I would like for you to use. Okay. Now, a number of you are used to a paper outline. I'm pretty much against paper outlines. My recommendation is to transform this into your Word document. And I'm a big proponent of computer outlines. The way that you would set up a computer outline is to set up your page with each individual required. Then what I want you to do is take the exact wording from the case, bring it right back into your actual Word document where you're typing your response into the case, okay? And the reason why I want you to do this is that it will constantly remind you in the exact language, not your interpretation, but in the exact language that you're seeing it in the actual case, what you're supposed to do. And then you might want to allocate yourself a little bit of time on how much you think you're going to take. So this is concept 2 and 3 out of RODAC, where you are basically outlining and then categorizing all the different responses into the different competency areas. Okay. The next stage from here would be to apply the correct formatting. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. Now, before I talk about that, I wanted to share my own experience. I've mentioned that I was a CPA marker, and I wanted to mention my own experience about the top mistakes that CPA candidates make. In my opinion, after seeing thousands of cases back to back to back in a real live simulation scenario, you start getting trends and you start noticing that things are going wrong. So this is kind of a couple of the mistakes that I picked up on. Before you Before I kind of jump into this, I want to talk about the general strategies. Okay, so first and foremost, I wanted to summarize what I'm going to say. When you read one of these cases, they look completely scrambled, right? So the information on page 2 might relate to page 5. The information on page 4 might relate to page 1. It looks like a dog's breakfast. The very first time that you see these cases, they look scary. Why? Because they're so unorganized. And you know what? That's intentional. They're supposed to be unorganized. This is the best way to test whether you're able to absorb information. Now, it's not fair if you walk into this exam with no training, expecting to somehow piece together these responses. So, the most challenging thing about what you're going to do is first figure out how to organize all of your responses. So, a lot of what we do is focus on strategy and how do you specifically take a response and design it in a way that will help the marker do a better job with your response and ultimately provide you with more marks. And what do I look for from kind of a marker's perspective? I look for three things. I look for, do you have your enabling competencies right? So in other words, are you focusing on the big picture? Do you have great grammar, spelling, sentence structure? I'm looking to see whether you are a competent writer. The second thing I'm looking for is, are you able to write well? Now, are you just providing me with the right answer, quote unquote, or are you going above and beyond and providing me with content that would satisfy the needs of the users? And are you organizing things in the correct kind of way? Which brings me to my third point. Everything as part of these exams is heavily standardized. And the strongest candidates, the ones that pass consistently year after year after year, are those that apply a strategic response and don't attempt to go for a perfect answer. A perfect answer means you will run out of time. Okay. And the last thing that I could leave you with, and this is something which you have to be really careful about, you will run out of time. I guarantee it. There is no way you can do all of the different issues in these cases. Absolutely no way. These exams are not designed to be 4-hour exams or 5-hour exams. They're really designed to be 10-hour exams, but they knowingly give you less time to see how you do compared to another candidate. Awesome. Okay. So let me share a couple of other mistakes that people make. So I wanted to piece together a couple of mistakes that I often see people make, and these are consistently relevant. I want to remind people of these because I constantly notice that there are issues back to back to back with a lot of cases that I end up marking, even in today's world, right? So, what again, the first mistake that I would say CPA candidates make is spending too much time perfecting the quant. So, providing me with an answer that's perfect. Oftentimes, there's an inappropriate time allocation between the numbers and then between your own explanation. You have to spend time explaining things verbally. You have to explain to me why you're putting something together and why the numbers make sense. The numbers by themselves never provide me with enough depth. And just know that you have to say, provide me sometimes with pros and cons for a particular answer based on something that might not necessarily be attached to a number. So just like in real life, just because someone provides you with an attractive proposal to invest in something, you're going to consider using your soft skills and to determine something like, can I trust this person with this recommendation to say invest in a business? Above and beyond trying to run the numbers, you're going to think about, do I want to work with this person? Is this person doing something that's ethical? Does this make sense? All of these things that are going through the back of your head is what I'm talking about here. So make sure that you leave enough time to talk about the qualitative. The second mistake that I often see people do is people tend to overlabel their Excel files, providing me with every formula. And this is in part because a lot of CPA facilitators that I've seen are unaware that CPA Canada provides access to to Microsoft Excel in the marking center, so I can actually see your exact your exact formulas. So prior to 2013, what ended up happening was there was a bit of an issue with markers getting access to your information, specifically in your Excel document, which is why a lot of people were suggesting to overlabel their Excel files by providing the formulas and providing me with really pretty looking kind of graphs in general. This has been subsequently fixed with the addition of Microsoft Excel. My recommendation is if you want to spend more time somewhere, spend it in the Word document portion and not the Excel. Number three, lack of a proper outline or plan. I talked about outlining earlier. If you continue to not use an outline and if you just go and write little side margin notes as you're reading the case, and I know this is going to resonate with some of you, and I'm going to be very clear. If you do this, if you write little margin notes to yourself as you're reading the case and you don't do anything else other than that, you are at a disadvantage compared to someone who has a formal outline. I promise you. And a formal outline and the concept of putting a formal outline together, working within an outline, knowing how to use an outline to your advantage will really help you. And my recommendation is to use a computer-based outline, especially if you're from the millennial generation. If you grew up with computers, people can generally type significantly faster than they can write. And it's something that you're going to find to be really, really good. Okay. The next one is no focus on the big picture or users. So sometimes you'll provide me with an accounting discussion that will say, why is this IFRS standard incorrect or correct? And you'll just leave it as is. And really, the idea is you want to describe what can go wrong when someone relies on incorrect information. And when someone relies on incorrect information, they are much more likely to make the wrong decision, right? So you have to make sure that the report is intended for specific users, that you're providing me with enough guidance to suggest why something is done the right way or not. And because of that, this big picture type of discussion, this value added part of the discussion is so crucial. Next is related to formatting. I often find that people tend to spend way too much time on some parts of the format. So once I explain the best ways to format certain sections, and which I will be doing later on in this presentation, what you'll notice is some people will then take the formatting and ignore it, and will still spend more time in the areas that they find to be easy for them instead of what, say, a client would want as part of this response. Now, naturally, this is the benefit of having a one-to-one session with one of our prep trainers, because we can explain exactly where the challenges are and go line by line by line with you to help you get over and kind of overcome some of these weaknesses, right? But the idea is that you have to be able to adapt the response to the format, not the other way around. Okay, the next one is a really popular one. I get questions like this at least once a week where people ask me, am I allowed to copy and paste CPA Canada handbook sections? Now, a lot of you know the CFE is an open book exam. You have an ability to go right into the handbook. There's even a search query. So you can go in and type in section 3400, bang, you have revenue recognition. You can even type specific words and go directly to the standard, right? So, I mean, that all sounds great, but what ends up happening is people just paste in their entire response and don't provide me with anything above and beyond that. And us other people try to blend in the font, to remove the italicized letters, and to pretend like they wrote it. This is really dangerous. This is not something that I would recommend for you to do. All I'm looking for is your own value added. I'm not looking for you to paste the handbook section. Again, this is something that we cover a lot during the one-on-one sessions. So if you want a little bit more clarification about what I mean by this, please feel free to book a session and we'd be happy to explain using a real case, right? That's really the best way to learn, through kind of that one-on-one relationship. But what I will say is, generally speaking, candidates are discouraged from pasting in the handbook sections, because it's really easy to lose out in that kind of a way, because you might not be adding in the level of depth that you think you're adding in. And I would not be able to award you any marks for any information that doesn't belong to you. For example, the actual handbook standard. And last but not least, I kind of talked about this earlier already. So at the end of each case, you have to provide a big picture conclusion. You have to be able to spot an issue. All right. And this is what I was talking about earlier. And the other mistake that I often see people make is they don't necessarily have the any ability to provide that conclusion based on the information that they're reading it in the case. Okay, so always make sure that you conclude with a couple of sentences explaining the big picture. Okay, now like I mentioned, I talked with a lot of 2015 successful CFE writers, and I wanted to get some advice. I wanted to say, okay, well, what would you say? Obviously, this is all going to be anonymized. I'm not legally allowed to provide any information about who these people are, nor would I ever want to, by the way, right? So, I mean, my intent really is just to try to suggest a better way to spend your time by polling as many people as possible. So I ended up polling about 30 to 40 people before we arrived at this, and overwhelmingly, people were talking about to focus on strategy and formatting. Okay, so I'm going to walk through what I mean by this. So first of all, you have to understand some basic rules again, that each case is divided into requireds, right? So a required is an opportunity for you to speak about something. Each required is, or what is known as an assessment opportunity, is an opportunity for marks. There are multiple marks offered within each assessment opportunity. Each required in each section is worth one set of marks. So not one mark, but one set of marks, okay? If you spend too long in one area, you'll miss marks in another, right? So you have to make sure, and this is why the outline had a specific number of minutes allocated to it, that if you reach that maximum, you would have had to cut yourself off immediately and jump right into another section. And in my opinion, it's better to do reasonably well in all areas instead of doing very well in one area and then poorly in others. This is the most common reason why people fail. And this is what is deemed a level 1 fail based on sufficiency, right? The next thing is, again, this is the third time that I'm mentioning this. You have to know how to outline things properly. If you have 3 or 4 or 5 topics in one short case, you have to make sure that you are allocating 10 to 15 minutes per topic, but not more. If you're noticing that during the allocation process, you feel like one section is worth more than another, and you're allocating 25 minutes, and the case is only a 75-minute question, I mean, including reading, you have basically 30, 40, or 50 minutes to even read this entire case. If you're allocating the majority of that time to one of the areas, you have to reconsider what you're doing, right? Because again, each assessment opportunity is its own set of marks. Sometimes you might be able to hit the maximum number of marks in one area compared to another and pass with significant ease, right? Because you might be able to talk about the less important topics, but you might score a higher number of marks. So force yourself, and this is what's required as part of the case writing process, force yourself to move on to another assessment opportunity, even if it means that you are feeling uncomfortable with the idea. Even when it's inconvenient or difficult, move on. Okay? Now, I wanted to share a couple of the suggested formats, right? So we now talked about, right, RODAC. So we are reading, we're outlining, right? We're dividing things into the competency areas, and now we're applying these formats. Okay, so how do we apply these formats? I wanted to put together a couple of really key formats. Those of you that write using paragraphs, so like a paragraph style, instead of using bullet points, I would strongly urge you to consider using a modified type of bullet point format. The reason for it is that it would really maximize the amount of marks. that you can generate within one particular amount of time. Okay, so I wanted to put together, based on my recommendations from 2015 writers, I wanted to put together a couple of the recommended formats that people have used. And here they are. Okay, so I'm going to go by each technical competency area, and we're going to talk about each individual topic, and we're going to put them together and explain them in a little bit of depth. Right? We don't have a ton of time to go into significant depth, and this is often what we do as part of the one-on-one sessions. This gives you a glimpse into what we do and what you should be thinking about when working directly on a one-to-one basis with us. So the first thing is, I'll start with assurance, and the reason for it is this is probably the most misunderstood area on the exam. Assurance is an application-based technical section. It's not technical in nature, but sometimes you are thinking about ethical considerations, so you're noticing something ethically going wrong. I would like for you to use an ICR format. So introduce the issue that you're talking about. So say, explain the identifying area of potential fraud, but keep it a potential, right? So don't ever accuse anybody of doing something wrong. So the accounting clerk may be stealing and committing fraud, right? So I'm not necessarily blaming and kind of harassing a person for something that I don't have any evidence for. The next is the criteria or the CS treatment. So explain your requirements as a CPA. So I need to extend my audit testing by including additional procedures for fraud under CS 240. So you might want to discuss what that means. And then you'd want to recommend, right? So you'd recommend to escalate and keep it both and keep it to both a short-term and long-term focus while considering users. So I would advise the audit committee of this fraud, and then in the short term, I would improve, say, maybe the controls, right? So you want to think about kind of a double-sided approach. So ICR, RAMP. Another type of assurance format is if you're performing it and planning for an audit, you'd want to look for the RAMP format. So this is for an audit planning memo. You'd want to consider the risks. Typically provide me with 3 key risks. Focus on the inherent, the control, and the detection risk. And you must conclude on overall risk. So you might want to tell me, okay, well, overall, based on these 3 key risks, overall risk is high. And you want to explain why. The approach, the A, do you go full substantive? Do you go combined? Or do you go full controls? On these exams, it's extremely rare to see full controls, and also pretty rare to see combined, because generally you're dealing with really extreme situations, right? So this is not like real life. You're writing a standardized exam where the institute's trying to test whether you have the right skills by testing you on the most challenging of topics. So really what you want to consider is, what do you suggest and why? The M is your materiality. So explain who the users are. Materiality is never related to risk. Explain the materiality base itself and calculate materiality while considering all factors involved. And procedures, I'm going to talk about on the next slide. And procedures, I like to use a RAP acronym. So think Kanye West. I'm not promoting his music, but I think it's just a really easy way to remember how to write a perfect procedure. The R stands for risk covered. What risk are you covering? So in order to stop the misappropriation of assets, I'm going to test the completeness and existence. So that's like kind of like the categorization of procedures, which is the assertion. And the procedure itself, provide a procedure that's realistic and both actionable. So before year end, right? So I'm providing an actionable procedure, conduct an inventory count on a randomly selected day, and conduct a floor to sheet and sheet to floor count, blah, 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 blah. Right? So I just provided you with a perfect procedure, and RAP is the perfect acronym for it, and it's really easy to remember. One of the other ways that I wanted to share is WIR. It's probably the most common one out of the bunch. I have seen a number of people use slightly modified approaches to this, where they, instead of weakness, they call it a deficiency. Now, it doesn't really matter what you use, right? The specific language doesn't really matter here. I'm more looking for, are you applying the standard correctly or not? And in this case, you're looking for the weakness is really the case facts, right? So for example, the case fact here is Tim is the only employee who creates invoices and enters information and collects payments. So I'm basically hinting on the fact that there's a lack of a segregation of duties here. The implication is, how are your users affected by this? So here, the lack of segregation leads to fraud. You can't ever stop at fraud. Implication means more than just fraud. Explain how fraud affects the long term. And in this case, it's the long-term viability of the business. So if you're noticing that a business is constantly affected by fraud, you can't continue to operate. And R is a recommendation. So suggest a new control and be specific. So implement a new hiring policy and suggest for one additional employee to be hired immediately, and review the effectiveness of the policy periodically. And one of the last ways that assurance can be tested is special reports. This is the most uncomfortable section for most people that I talk to. Why? Nobody does special reports in their day-to-day life. It's a section that people have no clue how to do. And I'm going to make it very easy on you right now. So in our program, we cover what the special reports are and provide examples specifically on how to go through each one of them. But I'm just going to suggest a format on how to apply them. And the application is to focus first on the report name. I recommend using at least 2 different reports. You'd want to look for a level of assurance, explain whether this is an audit or review. So are you comparing 2 different assurance engagements, like with an audit level, or are you comparing 2 different levels of assurance? So aka 1 audit, 1 review, because that's the possibility as well. You want to talk about pros of each, right? So I don't like pros and cons. Pros and cons is really confusing because people end up using the same con as a pro for the other section. And as a marker, I can't give you marks twice. It doesn't make sense. So use a pro and pro, right? So the pro of each type, the pro of each side makes it really easy for me to understand whether you get it or not. The user impact. So what are your users looking for? What do you think they're going to be more affected by? And the C, the conclusion, the recommendation. Suggest me a way. I suggest using the following report, and here's why. Financial accounting. So financial accounting is a really important section as well. I'm going to talk about how to specifically talk about issues. So you'd want to discuss, first of all, the identification. So you want to tell me about a really important issue that you found in the case, and you've ranked it high enough to be able to discuss. And this usually comes comes as part of the case when you are forced to talk about a particular problem. You have to then explain the analysis, explain why the issue is correct or incorrect, and provide me with whether the accounting makes sense or not. And support this with case facts and give reasons based on the handbook, right? So explain to me with guidance based on the conceptual framework or even basic definitions of Section 1000, explain why something would make sense or not. In addition to it, you want to explain the correct accounting treatment. So are there alternatives to the accounting treatments? If yes, then explain them. If no, then explain why. And you'd want to provide the criteria considering both sides of the impact on both the balance sheet and the income statement, and quantify. Okay, always quantify. If you have enough information, always try to quantify, explain what it would be. The easiest trick here is to think of the journal entry and explain using the criteria. And formally provide a conclusion. It's really important for me to know which of the alternatives you've decided to pick to actually stick with, and then you would move forward. The last 2 parts are really important, but people always forget them. Considering the impact on other areas. So this is kind of your hook or your big picture. So consider how accounting may impact other areas in the case. So think of how this is going to be a pervasive issue and how this might impact something different. So another competency area, another big picture discussion, the going concern, and so forth. And also tie into other competency areas. So you want to think about how procedures are going to be specifically affected, and talk about the tax implications of using different accounting alternatives. Okay, so think about how to tie in a different competency area topic. Finance. I often get a question from people saying, how do I structure my finance quants? And we actually have a finance webinar coming shortly. We're going to be presenting some of the most tested areas as part of the finance competency, and we also have a management accounting webinar coming up shortly. Taught by a really great speaker, and who is able to communicate, and is super knowledgeable in the subject area. You'll hear a little bit more information about this shortly. But we're going to be providing a comprehensive review going forward of finance. But the purpose of this is just to describe the way that generally you should do this as part of a case scenario, where you'd want to first of all cover the quant itself. Typically 3 to 5 years worth of information in your cash flow is great. And considering that you're writing a standardized exam, you often don't have time to talk about things from a really formal perspective. So oftentimes it makes sense for you to use a really easy format like cash inflows versus cash outflows. And remember, you only have 15 minutes for both a quant and qualitative. So you don't need every single adjustment. You need the major ones, and you need to understand this is part of your plan, what you want to cover and what you probably can leave out. And you have to use present value, okay? So at the end of all of this, provide me with a one conclusion, kind of a recommendation, and move on. Like I mentioned, so in, let's say, 15 minutes, assuming that you have to do this quantitative format, and you have to answer an assessment opportunity or required in finance, you also want to talk about the qualitative. And I gave a couple of examples here on what some of the most major qualitative points are. So you want to maybe look at pros and cons in the context of the user's needs. You want to maybe discuss the major adjustments. So you want to discuss maybe why you picked one adjustment over another. You want to also, again, focus on which option works within the user's needs, short-term and long-term. And you want to provide a recommendation and the solution that's possibly not covered by the client. So if they're asking you to say, what is your opinion of the best way out of these two options to finance our operation? Well, maybe a recommendation and solution could be, well, why do you want to expand? I mean, there's nothing here that requires expansion. So this is a possibility. Don't be scared to provide advice a little bit outside of case facts, okay? And overall, you should conclude on both financial and non-financial factors considered, and just provide me with an overall reaching discussion and comparison of all the different possible topics. From a management accounting perspective, it's really the same idea, right? So management accounting requires you to also think about it from a user's perspective. I just try to come up with the same type of information for a management accounting type of a required, but a lot of this information will be remarkably similar to what you've already seen before. The last kind of part here that is often being tested as part of management accounting is performance measures, and I recommend an IGR format where you would introduce the issue, explain the problem in the case. You'd want to talk about the goal and or action, and you'd want to recommend a performance measure. So recommend a KPI, a metric, and we can do this with you through the one-on-one sessions. This is something that we talk about a lot of because performance measures are really commonly tested on the CFE and have been tested quite a bit under the legacy exams as well. So this is an area that you definitely want to feel comfortable with. Tax. Evaluation of tax. Tax is very much a black and white answer. There's often not a lot of discussion which you can add, so it's important to just write things in the right way, right? So think of CCAR, criteria, case facts, alternatives, if any, and then recommend a tax treatment. If you don't have any numbers, then try to go after it in theory. If you have numbers, try to calculate and try to come up with something that makes sense. And governance, my recommendation is to use an IIR format, very similar to a WIR, but you're looking at things from an issue perspective instead of a W. That's probably the most common of the governance requirements that you'll see. And that's the end of the webinar. So before we kind of fully wrap up, I'd like to just explain a little bit more about what we do. So why PrepFormula? We provide a unique and personalized one-on-one learning experience for the CPA module exams and the 2016 CFE. Students have an option to work with a qualified and currently practicing CPA with professional marketing experience on a one-to-one basis from now all the way up until the CFE. We provide full learning materials from start to finish that complement the Capstone 1 and Capstone 2 learning programs. And you can practice using PrepFormula cases designed to mimic the exam. As a student, you'll also receive a T2202A covering the majority of our program fees. So you'll get a refund on your taxes for taking our program. We had an 89% pass rate in 2014. And like I've mentioned, as of October 2015, PrepFormula is Canada's largest CPA prep program in Canada. This is our website. And I wanted to introduce our 2016 CFE prep program for those of you that are not enrolled. I do want to say that the program is almost sold out for the May 2016 CFE prep attempt. For those of you that are considering the program, I would strongly urge you to consider enrolling because we are almost sold out for May. We still have space for September 2016. And what you get is a dedicated mentor from now all the way up until you pass the CFE. We have a pass guarantee. The mentor is a recent professional CPA marker and or facilitator. We provide one-on-one coaching sessions where we review your answer line by line by line to help you write better. We also provide professionally double mark practice cases, a personalized schedule, so a custom schedule for each exam that you write with us, a set of objective format questions and a case database, full summarized notes, videos, and technical materials, full Capstone 1 and Capstone 2 assistance one-on-one, and like I mentioned, a pass guarantee where we provide ongoing access to all of our materials until you pass. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. If you have any questions at all about the material, please don't hesitate to contact me. If you don't want to list your question in the live chat software here, please feel free to email me direct or call me. This is my direct line. You can call me anytime. If you're requesting a note package or if you want to get this presentation in a PDF, please email education@prepformula.com. And a replay link will be automatically sent to your email in about 24 hours. Again, I want to say thank you very much for attending this webinar. And what I'm going to do now is look through your actual response, look through your actual questions, and ask to, and kind of be able to answer some of the questions that that you're asking in this webinar at the moment. Okay. So I'm going to start from the bottom and I'll just read them out. So I have a question about, and this is actually kind of a funny question, is the CFE designed to fail candidates or give them the most opportunities to pass? In my opinion, I'm going to answer this way. Being a CPA marker, I think this process is incredibly fair. Okay, so I'm going to be extremely upfront with you that after seeing the controls in place and after seeing the way that things are marked, in my opinion, this process is extremely fair. It's just not transparent. Okay, so it's not transparent at all, but believe me when I say that it's totally fair on the other side of the fence. It's not designed to fail candidates. It's in my opinion, that's a little harsh. The way that I would describe it is it's got a set of standard rules. It's a game. And if you know how to play this game, and if you practice case writing playing the same game, you are very likely to pass. Okay, so I actually think it's completely possible. Asim, to achieve depth, do you need C in all assessment opportunities during day 2? And the answer is no. You need to achieve a C on some of the assessment opportunities specifically in your depth areas, but you don't need to hit every single one. But it really depends, right? So it really depends on how well the other candidates do as well. And aside from FR, MA, and assurance, one of the questions was, aside from FR, MA, and assurance, do you only need breadth for the other competency areas? And the answer is yes. And Antonio, I would completely agree. So I'm going to say that that this exam is very much like this concept of a client walking in with a shoebox full of papers and slamming it on your desk and saying "good luck" and walking away, because that's exactly what these cases feel like to me, where there's just a bunch of information all randomly scrambled, and it's your responsibility first of all, before you even start analyzing anything, is to plan, right? So the best candidates that pass this exam time and time again, from what I've noticed, okay, are the ones that are able to plan the response before attacking it. So it's kind of like, what would you rather do? Would you rather take this shoebox and first of all divide it into the different, say, categories of expenses, or would you want to go and practice them one to one to one? And process them or one by one. Well, what if there's duplicates? I mean, right? So just like with everything else in life, um, proper planning doesn't hurt. Um, so Vikas is saying, are we able to outline these case facts in margin in the actual exam? And the answer is yes. So I would strongly kind of, advise against it, but technically you're able to do so. Vanessa's saying, I'm a margin note writer. What would be an example of an outline to make so we don't have to know? Vanessa, I'd be really happy to actually provide you with a document explaining what I mean about a proper outline. Okay. And a computer-based outline is one of the best things which you can do. And you can learn how to perfect. And you might be able to do a short case by using side margin notes, and you probably won't experience too much difficulty using a short case, Vanessa. But what you'll notice is when you get into these 5-hour cases, the amount of depth will be so extreme that you won't be able to keep up. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of other things. How many pages do you write on a 120-minute case? Sophia, it's not so much about how many pages I would like a candidate to write. It's all about being able to answer all the very different parts of assessment opportunities. So it's not so much about how many cases should you have. It's about having um, an appropriate amount of depth based on each section, and that means different things for different people. So I wouldn't say basically that a longer response necessarily means a better response. The exam is the exam itself is a printed piece of paper, but you type your response up. Okay, so there was a question here about, is the exam paper based or do we need to give it on a computer? And the answer is you have to type it out on a computer, but you get a physical copy that you can use. Thank you very much to those of you that are saying thank you, and I really appreciate it. Um, Antonio's saying, can you give us a good example of a candidate who uses excellent integration skills when answering a question? Antonio, I would say that the best experiences that I've seen with people that are integrating decisions is imagine they take an accounting issue and they tie in everything to do with accounting directly into other areas. So they might notice that there's a long-term kind of risk of something going wrong, or they notice that there is potentially an issue with a bank covenant. So a bank requires a company to maintain specific key ratios, and by making one of the adjustments, they are automatically outside of that normal range. And then immediately what happens is you automatically say trigger the loan repayment. So right, so you might have to read in between the lines. My recommendation is the strongest candidates that I see are the ones that understand the big picture first and then do everything later. Okay, so they write within the context of this big picture. Their entire case seems to flow within the big picture. And all they're doing later is applying the correct formatting and kind of moving things forward. But every sentence is written within the context of the big picture. Lawrence is saying, "What do you mean by pass guarantee?" And Lawrence, we offer a ongoing access until you pass. Even if you are unsuccessful on the 2016 CFE with us, you will not have to pay again to access our materials. Tracy's asking, would you give some recommendations on how to use the competency map? And my recommendation to you, Tracy, is not to use the competency map. I mean, you might want to read it once, but my suggestion for you is to more work within our documents, because the competency map is extremely vague. So there's just not a lot of information on there which you can extract other than the level of difficulty about one particular topic. So I would strongly advise you to move kind of into one area over another. The next question is, will we have to do the questions on hard copy during the exam, or do we have to read on soft copy? So, Sita, the questions are always going to be in a hard copy, but then you type our response in soft copy on your computer. Lawrence, why is the pass rate in PrepFormula went down to 89%? Or if I remember correctly, it used to be a 98%. Then you remember incorrectly. I apologize, but our pass rate has always been 89%. It has never been 98%. So unfortunately, this looks like something that you remember incorrectly. Really happy to help. You're very welcome to anyone who's saying thank you. Shilpi is asking, do Prep provide knowledge of technical subject for CFE? And yes, we provide full coverage of all technical sections. For those of you that are asking for a copy of the slides, please review the slide that's on your screen right now for instructions on how to obtain. So there is a specific point here on how to ask for the slides here. Okay. And Chloe's saying, when comparing different financing investment opportunities, are we supposed to discuss the pros and cons for all of them, or just the ones we are recommending? Chloe, honestly, I don't recommend pros and cons. I recommend pros and pros. And I would say yes, and choose pros for each section. So the answer is yes. Provide me with the pros of using each option, and explain how to go back and forth. Hamid is saying, how can I book a one-on-one session? And please feel free to reach out to me, Hamid, by email, okay? And I'll help you out with that. Zarni, you're very welcome. Thank you for attending again. And that's the end of the questions. Thank you very, very much for attending today. I really do appreciate this. I know that this is a Sunday, and I'm taking time away from your family. And you are spending time with me today. I really want to say thank you very much, and I hope you've learned a bit or a lot, hopefully, based on all of the information that has been provided. I'm really happy to put these webinars on together to maximize the amount of impact that we do in general within accounting education. And really our goal is to make it easier for students to go through this process. And to answer your questions about, are we preparing additional webinars, we run an average of 7 to 8 webinars a month. And there is going to be a tax webinar in early March that we are planning. It's going to be with Jason Fleming, the tax educator in all of Canada. He's a published author. And he writes a book called CFE Tax. and he's a York University prof as well. So we are going to be putting on a really large presentation again with Jason Fleming. We ran one in the past, and go Broncos! Yes, definitely. It's football Sunday, so that's you know what I'm going to be doing later. Um, one of the questions is one of the last questions here is, where is the location of the one-on-one sessions? And Asa, we do all of the sessions through Skype or phone. So feel free to, we can also share our screen in the same kind of way, and to be able to kind of discuss a case directly with you. I personally prefer either phone or Skype. That's really the best option. That way you don't have to travel anywhere, and at the same time we can communicate what we want to say on a line by line basis. Again, I want to say thank you. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.